Hey everyone, and welcome to my Yae Miko review. Thanks to Hoyoverse, I was able to get my hands on Yae Miko early, and I've put a lot of time into trying out different interactions, different teams, different weapons, and different content with her. Since I had all this time with her, I felt it was only fair that I'd share my experience with you guys so that you can make an educated decision on whether or not the character is for you. That being said, I really don't care who you spend your Primogems on. I just know that if I didn't have early access to Miko, this is all information that I would want to have beforehand. But who am I, and why should you listen to me? Well, first off, I'm Braxaphone. Nice to meet you. I've been playing Genshin Impact since release and also making content since the very beginning of the game. I've been very invested in theory crafting, and even though I'm not terribly good at math myself, all of my videos utilize my own testing combined with references from well-known theory crafters. I also spend a lot of time talking to fellow content creators and theory crafters about my findings, and oftentimes they reciprocate the same findings that I do. That's why when you see someone post a based opinion of a character, oftentimes I've already said it. Additionally, even though I have a deep understanding of the meta and character standings in the game, I still consider myself to be a waifu over meta player because I feel like it's more important to play who you want to the best of your ability than feel forced to play a very specific unit because somebody told you to. Now, before I get into the review, I just want to make it as clear as possible. I often will be very critical of characters when I review them, but that doesn't mean that I dislike the character or you for pulling the character. At the end of the day, I don't really care what you do with your Primogems. Being a very experienced and long-time player, I just want to put out my opinion on the character from a meta perspective. And when I say meta perspective, I mean that in this video, I'm focusing on how good of a unit she is compared to other units that are popular in the same role that she's in. Keep in mind though that this video is based on my opinion, and you may find that you enjoy things that I don't, or that you think the character is better or worse than I do. At the end of the day, only you can decide what's best for your account. With the wordy disclaimer out of the way, it's about time to talk about Yae Miko. We're going to start with some pros, then move on to some cons that I found, and then give our overall thoughts at the end. Let's get right into the pros. One of the very first things that I noticed about Yae Miko is that she has completely automatic off-field damage. With many characters that use their elemental skill or elemental burst for off-field damage, you have to attack to proc the damage. This includes characters like Albedo, C6 Fischl, regular beta without the Al, Xingqiu, etc. And with Yae Miko in particular, you don't have to do any of that. You could actually just put up Zhongli shield, put down Yae Miko turrets, and walk away, and assuming your Yae Miko's built enough, all the enemies might be dead in the next 15 seconds or so. Her off-field damage is also really easy to set up. You can just place the turrets, burst, then place them again, and then swap. It's a really easy rotation to follow, and on top of that, her off-field damage has a really great range. You can hit flying enemies, which means that specters might not annoy you anymore. The next pro that I want to talk about is her burst, actually. I think her burst is a really cool design. It's a giant nuke, and it has very good scaling. For those of you who don't know, her burst will activate one time with a big hit, but if you have 3 turrets out, it'll do 3 more hits of Electro that all have high scaling. If you have 2 turrets out, it does 2 extra hits, etc. And just in general, the burst does feel really powerful, and it feels really great to use. I like using her burst, and especially with enemies that can be grouped with a character like Venti, or even just Sucrose. By using Yae Miko's burst, you will see a ton of damage come out, and it feels awesome to use. And I think that in the future, if we ever see a Venti rerun, or maybe just when we're done with the Inazuma arc, we may see movable characters return, which would be very good for Yae. On top of that, another thing I noticed about Yae is just that she has great animations. You can tell that on the development end, they put a lot of work into making this character really come to life. And unlike a lot of characters that they just waifuize and make fall in love with the Traveler, you can tell that Yae is still very much the same person as when you first met her. I love her elemental burst animation. Some people might find it lazy, but in my opinion, I think it's awesome. It's really like menacing. It really shows the type of character that Yae is, and I feel like her animations really do capture Yae Miko. And the idea behind her aesthetic and everything just all came together really, really well to create this beautiful character with beautiful animations and beautiful concepts. In general, I think her animations are probably some of my favorite in the entire game. Another pro that Yae has is that she's not actually Bennett dependent, and a lot of people might think that that's not so much a pro as much as it is a team building tip, but I consider it a pro because Bennett is one of the most highly used supports in the game, if not the most highly used support, because almost every single team in the game wants Bennett to some degree. Bennett's just a universally good unit. There's only a few exceptions that really don't want to use him, like Permafreeze, and even then sometimes you could make an excuse just because Bennett provides so much utility to your team. But because Yae's turrets don't actually snap snapshot stats, then it just ends up being better in other teams, and you can finally find a use for Sarah now. Or maybe just more uses for Sarah. I know a lot of people do actually use her in Eula teams and Raiden teams, so having dynamic stats with her elemental skill just means that she is more flexible with the amount of buff units that she can use, and encourages her to be swapped out to other characters, which plays into her off-field DPS role. Another great thing about Yae is that as far as artifacts go, she's very easy to build. She can get away with a lot of two-piece sets and still perform extremely well, and for that reason you might not even have to farm for her. You might even just have leftover artifacts you can use and just throw them on her, and they'll still be very good. Lastly, Yae could be very strong centered around teams that have a lot of elemental reactions. Yae does still have standard ICD, which is internal cooldown, meaning that she can only apply Electro once every 2.5 seconds or once every 3 hits. But because she has her turrets firing off consistently, she can often be the trigger to any sort of aura element that's being applied, and in addition to that, if you decide to use her as a driver, she is applying a lot of Electro through her autos combined with her turrets, so in general she can be a good trigger. And in teams where you only run one pyro, she can also be a good aura. I guess what I mean to say in this section is that I think that she will be very good in overload teams as soon as we can crack the code on how to make those work better. And overall, she has some high potential with future units. So now we're going to move on to the cons of Yae Miko, and remember, keep in mind that this is all my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. This is just after my experience playing Yae early and sort of compiling my thoughts. The first major gripe I have with Yae Miko is that her synergy currently in the game is pretty limited due to her having a very high cost burst. For those of you who don't know, her burst costs 90 energy, and her turrets can only generate 5 energy every 15 seconds, which is about the lifespan of the turrets. Because there's an internal cooldown on actually generating the energy, even if you have 3 turrets down, you're still gonna get 5 particles. You'd have to offset turrets by 3 seconds in order to get extra. And because this energy generation isn't good enough to sustain a 90 cost burst unless you just funnel completely into energy recharge, she feels very dependent on Raiden or Fischl. And being dependent on Fischl is sort of the same problem that Beidou has. It already occupies 2 slots of your team, so you only have 2 other spots to work with. Does that mean you can't play her with other characters? No, not really, but it doesn't feel as easy and just in general good to play her if you don't have Raiden or Fischl in the same party. Now, another con that I found for Yae Miko is that her turret placement takes about 2 seconds compared to Fischl, who takes minimal field time for similar results. Now, you might be thinking, 1 extra second isn't really that big of a deal, but the thing is, for optimal Yae play, you also want to use her burst, and when you use her burst, it destroys all of the turrets on the field, so you have to take another 2 seconds to put out the turrets. So in total, to get the most out of Yae, you have to take up 6 seconds on the field before you can even swap to your next character, and that's honestly longer than you need for most rotations. I can't help but think that they could have made her Ascension passive to refresh the turret timers rather than destroy them. In general, it just feels kind of bad. And though Yae does do more damage than Fischl, the ease of play that Fischl brings to the table, where you just switch into her, press E, and then switch off, is just so straightforward and simple. It's hard to get used to a character that takes that much field time to accomplish a similar task. Another negative to Yae Miko that I found is animation lock. Now, this might not seem like a big deal to you, but for most characters in the game, once you use their elemental skill, you can switch off of them in the middle of the animation to cycle through your characters very fast. On top of that, a lot of characters can have their animations canceled by sprinting or using their elemental burst as well, and it just honestly streamlines the whole process of combat, especially in Spiral Abyss where you have a time limit. Well, in Yae Miko's case, once you start placing down a turret, you literally can't stop until that turret is placed. Like, Yae would sooner roll over and die than allow you to stop placing this turret. She takes damage in the animation from big enemies and still will not get staggered at all. As far as I can tell, there's no iframes during the animation. Now, I might be wrong, there might be iframes, but at least during the initial start of the cast, when you turn invisible, you can still be hit. Now, I will also say that this animation doesn't cost any stamina, so if you're just looking to dodge and you're in like the cryo domain, she's pretty good for that because you don't have to use any stamina to move. But in general, the animation lock makes her feel really clunky. The next negative thing, at least in my opinion, is that her normal and charged attacks have a lot of problems. Now, obviously, Hoyoverse decided to make her auto attack multipliers worse, so that way she wouldn't be an on-field DPS, but the problem with this is that it just means she's not flexible at all. Her charged attack animation is also extremely long, so even if you want to deal massive damage with her charged attack, it takes forever to cast, and she can be interrupted during the cast. On top of that, her charged attack costs 50 stamina, which is standard for Catalyst users, so that's not really that big of an issue, but combined with the slow animation and everything, her normal and charged attacks just feel really bad to use. Now, the last major gripe that I have with Yae Miko is actually based on her constellations, and you might be thinking as a free-to-play or low-spender player that this doesn't actually apply to you, but the principle of the constellations being bad is kind of still there regardless of whether or not you have them. So the main issue is that her constellations lock 120% of her initial strength behind a paywall. What I mean by that is if you get to Constellation 6, your Yae Miko will be over twice as strong as she started. And you can argue that, okay, you're spending $1,000 on a character, that's how it should be, and I would agree with that. But the fact of it is that her power level isn't that good to begin with. Like, she's fine as a unit, she's playable, she's slightly better than Fischl in terms of her damage output, at least over time. But to give you some context, Raiden's Constellation 2 and 3 are her biggest damage increases, and those are Constellation 2 and 3. Now, if you have a character that's overall doing less for the team, but costs the same amount as another character, and then constellations end up being more expensive than the other character, you can understand how that raises some issues. In general, I think Yae should have had her Constellation 6 switched with her C2 as well. And again, as a free-to-play player, it doesn't really affect you, but it just sucks that they decided to lock so much power behind her constellations, because Yae feels like she would benefit a ton from constellations, like almost astronomically different from other characters. And keep in mind that I'm playing her at C0 right now with her signature weapon, so I already have an edge on players who aren't able to get her signature weapon. Her signature weapon is like a 30% damage increase in some scenarios. It's really solid. And this is how I still feel about her damage and contributions to the team. So now that we've talked about my opinion on Yae's pros and cons, we can talk about kind of the overall verdict and what I think about the character as a whole. My overall verdict is that Yae, while she can be a solid unit and she's definitely playable, she feels less free-to-play friendly to me, specifically because of her constellation lock, because of her weapon being so much better than non-signatures, and you could argue that that's how a character should be, but it's just a little disheartening to see that the character direction is changing heavily in favor of Wales when many of the other characters released felt very good to play, even at C0. The other thing that I have to say about Yae Miko is that C6 Fischl exists, and the thing is that Fischl provides more than damage. Now again, it is worth noting that Yae Miko's damage is higher than Fischl. She's going to bring more to your team in terms of raw damage output, but the issue is that Fischl provides more than just damage, and she does it in less time. Fischl is a great battery for your team, generating much more energy than Yae will, and for players who have been around for a really long time, many of you guys already have Fischl. I just cannot in good faith recommend this character from a meta perspective when Constellation 6 Fischl exists. That being said, there are still reasons to pull for her. If you like balanced off-field electro damage and emphasis on balanced, at least at Constellation 0, Yae's actually a good pull for that. She is good at being off-field damage, and it's not broken, but it's not necessarily underwhelming either. Additionally, her animations are beautiful, and she's very easy to build in terms of her artifacts because she has so many different two-piece sets that can work for her. On top of that, Yae is a great nuke, and if you like nuke characters, if you like seeing big numbers or a series of big numbers, or just watching boss health chip away very quickly, Yae Miko makes you feel very powerful with her animations combined with the amount of damage her nuke is able to do. And lastly, pull for Yae Miko if you want to play Yae Miko. If you do happen to get the character and you haven't already checked it out, I have a full guide on my channel that's talking about how to play her, how to build her optimally, and has just a ton of great information and tips about her kit, so I'd highly recommend you check that out. Let me know what you guys think about Yae Miko. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people who disagree with me, but there's also probably a lot of people who share the same sentiments. Just let me know kind of what boat you're in. Also, if you like the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have tons of Genshin Impact stuff, and we're also branching off to other games at some point in the future, and I'd really appreciate the support. Anyways, you guys, that's it for this video, and good luck with your Yae Miko pulls.